Hello, this video lecture will cover Chapter 5, Part 2 of Society and Finance, Government Crime. So we'll start off with a definition of state-organized crime. These are criminal acts that are committed by state officials in pursuit of their job as representatives of their state. And the example that is also in the book is in colonial America. The city of Charleston, which is in South Carolina, cultivated and protected pirates such as Blackbeard, and that's Blackbeard over here, ergo the ugly beard, and shared in the profits. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because who were the pirates generally going after? They were going after the rich sailing ships of the British, who, of course, in colonial America were not beloved by the colonists. So let's look at 20th century organized crime, state organized crime. So American forces have helped overthrow legitimate political leaders in the following countries: Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Nicaragua, Honduras, Iran, Guatemala, South Vietnam, Chile, and that's the last one is Iraq. The idea behind this concept is something called regime change. If we don't like a particular leader of a country, government forces will go in and provide munitions, they'll provide cash, they'll provide support to the rebel forces, so that when they are going up against the government of, for example, Honduras, these rebel forces are better equipped and they have military support from the Americans. And that's how these countries have their leaders overthrown, because we are supporting the rebel coalition. The rationale, of course, is to bring liberation or bring democracy to a country. On the other hand, a lot of these actions or operations have resulted in American companies getting super, super rich. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, you can look at these three companies, Lockheed Martin's, Base Systems, and Boeing, and they have made billions of dollars off of the war. And again, Lockheed Martin does munitions and weapon systems, Base Systems does weapon systems, and Boeing does aircraft. Then we have something called state terrorism. And this is when a state conducts operations that terrorize their own population. The examples that I have here for you: Stalin, that's Stalin right here. He was brutal towards the Russian people. It's estimated that he was responsible for between 12 and 20 million Russians being killed. And usually those people were the ones that he felt were enemies of the state. Intellectuals, people of certain racial backgrounds that he didn't like. And as such, he is really the king of killing his own people of the 20th century. This guy over here is Saddam Hussein, who was the president of Iraq. And he used chemical warfare against the Kurds in northern Iraq. This is one of the grave sites of the Kurds in northern Iraq. And it was, again, a racial thing, or an ethnic cleansing, where his tribe did not like the Kurdish tribe. And it may sound a little crazy, but in the same way, in the United States, we've gone after various groups because we didn't, quote unquote, like them. Think of the Native Americans. We took their land, we took their resources, and we pretty much destroyed them as fast and as well as we could. There is one of the most famous incidents of state crime is called the Iran-Contra affair from the 1980s. And this is when the White House authorized the sale of weapons to Iran, and this was just a few years after they kept Americans hostage, in exchange for funds to arm and support the Contras, who were fighting to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. And this violated multiple laws, including the Boland Amendment, which expressly forbid covert aid to the Contras, and the Neutrality Act, which prohibited military expenditures against governments the USA is not at war with. So, on the one hand, we don't like the Sandinista government, but then we are working with Iran, who is one of our biggest enemies to this day, to try and get money to support the Contras who are fighting to overthrow the Sandinista government. So obviously not a well thought out plan. It was discovered, and essentially Reagan pretty much skated through this because at the time everybody knew that he was suffering significantly from Alzheimer's disease. And when the investigation was brought to Congress and he came to answer questions, 99% of his answers were, "I do not recall." And no one doubted that he did not recall. Then we have state organized crime and the CIA. So the CIA was set up after World War II as an intelligence gathering agency to avoid the U.S. being attacked. And basically what an intelligence agency is a spy agency. Criminal activity by the CIA included opening U.S. mail, illegal surveillance of American citizens, which to some degree goes on to this day, assassination plots against foreign leaders. We tried to kill off Fidel Castro of Cuba and Rafael Trujillo of the Dominican Republic. Rafael Trujillo was in fact assassinated, and although the United States denied any involvement, most people in South America do believe that the CIA was involved in some way. Unlawful stockpiling of deadly poisons, bribing and blackmailing foreign leaders, which is why when last year it was revealed the NSA had tapped the personal phones of Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, and Angela Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, they were really mad because the thought process was that the NSA or the CIA or whatever government whatever government agency was listening to these phone calls were trying to get information to use against these particular political leaders. So let's look at white-collar crime and the police. The big three: perjury, which is giving false testimony, illegal searches, and tampering with evidence. So why do police engage in white-collar crime? A lot of times it's about numbers. They're given a number that they have to achieve every month or every year in terms of arrests and convictions. If you're a lousy police officer, they're going to get rid of you in just the same way that a lousy accountant or a lousy engineer is also going to be fired. So they have to make their numbers. And if they're not making their numbers, if they're not a good police officer, in fact, they will oftentimes do criminal actions such as give false testimony to ensure a conviction, which makes their numbers higher, which leads them to more raises, more promotions, more opportunities. Another issue that you see is that police officers do it for their own personal advancement. If you know that if you get a certain number of convictions and arrests, and that's the way to get promoted, you're going to do that as much as possible. And if your moral compass is not headed due north, if you're not an honest person, it's really easy to cheat. It's, in school, it's a matter of looking at the guy next to you. In the real world, it's a matter of committing a crime that you can live with in a lot of cases. Then we have corruption in the electoral process. Campaign finance reform began in the 1970s, which limited how much an individual donor could contribute to a politician. One of the ways of getting around these limits were to create political action committees. And what that means is it's a group that is funded through donations and works on behalf of a particular candidate. So, for example, here's some of the big ones. Restore Our Future, $131 million. The Workers' Voice, $15 million. American Crossroads, $80 million. And what you see then is that you're also getting donations from corporations. These are corporate donations called super PACs, which we'll talk about next. So let's go back to PACs. Although any group can form a PAC, the most important ones tend to be created by a coalition of wealthy corporations who funnel money to a candidate who is willing to, quote unquote, play ball with their needs. In other words, candidates who will promote the best interests of the corporations who donate to the Political Action Committee. So it's really just a way of legalized bribery in every sense of the word. So in 2009, and then the decision was actually publicized in 2010, there was a case called the Citizens United case, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, who ruled under the First Amendment the government could not restrict corporations from giving unlimited political donations. And this led to the development of what is known as super PACs. Super PACs are not allowed to coordinate directly with the candidate or political party, so they are, quote unquote, independent, and they are supposed to be promoting a candidate or political party or a particular issue without the direct involvement of the candidate or anyone from his or her staff, which pretty much everybody laughs at because everybody knows that behind closed doors all kinds of conversations are happening. This gentleman here is named Sheldon Adelstein, and he is the CEO of Sands Corporation, which runs a lot of the casinos in Las Vegas. He gave $52 million to super PACs in the 2012 cycle. And here's the thing. You cannot run for office in this country, whether it is mayor, whether it is a congressman, a governor, without money. So these folks, and specifically somebody like Sheldon Adelstein, is going to pretty much write the checks to get people elected. And therefore, the people that he wants elected are the people who will eventually be running our government. So this idea that we all have a voice is somewhat muted by the fact that we only have a voice about the candidates that are being supported financially by these big money people. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Sheldon Adelson, and the Koch brothers essentially support, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, the candidates who are running in the United States. Now, there's also something called soft money donations, and these are political donations that are supposed to exclusively promote a certain issue, not a specific candidate. Soft money became most well known when John Kerry ran for president. And what happened was there was a group called the Swift Boat Veterans, and that ran ads that basically said that John Kerry's military record was a lie, that he hadn't been heroic, that he hadn't been an outstanding military representative. And the fact of the matter is that these ads were all lies and were false, and that John Kerry was in fact an excellent military man. But because the soft money was with a group not affiliated with Kerry's opponent, they couldn't stop the ads despite them not being true. And the other thing is a lot of people only get their information from TV while they're watching, The Real Housewives or Kim Kardashian. And when they see these ads, they believe them. The fact that they don't actually have to be true is irrelevant to them. So rather than checking and establishing their accuracy, people just say, oh, he's a bad military guy and he's a liar, so I'm not going to vote for him. So let's look at political corruption in the 20th and 21st century. Most of our presidents have been accused of some level of political corruption, and if not them themselves, then their staffs. Some of the big corruption cases have included Warren G. Harding, who is this guy over here. He is actually the one who helped Prohibition get passed and had a deal with the mob to benefit on the side from all the illegal liquor sales. Eisenhower, Nixon, who was one of the big corrupt guys who had his people break into Democratic headquarters to steal campaign secrets, which is really ironic because Nixon was leading by double digits. and he should have just left well enough alone and he wouldn't have had to resign. Gerald Ford, he was primarily criticized for pardoning Nixon. As soon as Nixon resigned and Ford became president, his first act was to pardon Nixon, and a lot of people were very unhappy with that. Bill Clinton, aside from his Monica Lewinsky issue, also had multiple real estate deals that were questioned when he was running for president. And apparently, while he was president, he gave a lot of sweetheart deals to his old friends in Arkansas. George W. Bush, we've already talked about at some length in terms of what he was doing with the Iraq War and the war profiteering that his vice president had been involved in with Halliburton. To Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is not considered a corrupt president, but his administration was considered the most corrupt administration of all time. Let me give you an example. Basically, a lot of his staff saw the presidency as a way of cashing in on their positions, making money on the side. Michael Deaver, who is this guy, he was Reagan's deputy chief of staff. He left office in 1985 and then proceeded to collect millions of dollars selling access to the president and his staff. Rumor had it that a phone call on the behalf of a corporate CEO would cost about $100,000. An actual meeting with the president, depending on the amount of time, could be anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. And this was all going to Michael Deaver. It wasn't going to Ronald Reagan. So if you look at Reagan's corruption, and again, Reagan himself, not very corrupt, his staff, unbelievably corrupt. 200 members of the Reagan administration were investigated for ethical and criminal misconduct. 200 members, that's a lot. In one case, the Housing and Urban Development Department was defrauded of between 4 and 8 billion, billion with a B. That was done by giving grant money and contracts to Republican big money benefactors. Ironically, this is when homelessness got out of control in the United States, because the money that should have been going towards low-income housing was diverted and given away to these high-money Republicans who just basically use the money for their own personal use. Other white-collar political crimes include using one's position to evade arrest. For example, lots of examples of congressmen or senators who are caught drunk driving and try and get out of it because they are a congressman or a senator. In one case, a senator had been trying to pick up a man in a bathroom, and the man he was trying to pick up was actually a cop. So the cop arrested him. And when it came down to it, the senator was, "I'm a senator, you can't arrest me." And he said, "Well, you've been hitting on me while I was in the bathroom, so yes, I am arresting you." It ended the senator's career, but more importantly, what you see is people try to get out of arrests, not just because they are the senator, but because it will ruin their career in a lot of cases. Junketing is an example of taking exotic trips at taxpayer expense on the pretext of congressional or state business. Recently, Michelle Obama was heartily criticized for spending almost $800,000 on a trip to China to meet with the Chinese president and his family. And of course, you know, our relationship with China is strained. A lot of people could validate it as a good move on the Obama's part, but a lot of the Republicans said that was excessive. And again, what you used is partisanship. The Democrats said it was a good idea, the Republicans said it wasn't, and at the end of the day, the question is, does anybody need to spend $800,000 to go see the Russian or the Chinese premier for a week? Another thing that you see is something called double billing. And this is when a person will charge the government and a private company for the same service. So, for example, if one of you were hired to write a report by the Department of Defense on some weapon system, and you charge the government $100,000 to do this, and at the same time you're charging Lockheed Martin for the exact same report, and you're charging them $100,000. So it's basically not a horribly illegal thing, since it's, you're doing the work, but you're double billing, which is what makes it illegal. Using the free mailing privilege for campaigning or personal use, which is strictly forbidden in Congress. And what you see is a lot of these congressmen, they are using, it's called a franking system. They use it in order to send out pleas for political donations. And that, again, highly illegal. A few years ago, there was a banking scandal in Congress where all of the congressmen and women who had been bouncing checks were publicly admonished and revealed. And it was a horrible scenario to see how many people couldn't manage their own personal finances and had to keep bouncing checks through the congressional bank. And last but not least, and we've talked a lot about this, is the conflict of interest complications, where what you're doing is not really that kosher, because essentially you are taking a political donation in order to help someone. I scratch your back, you scratch my back. So we've pretty much exhausted the idea of political white-collar crime. What I want you to think about for, future, as you are, growing up and moving into your own system of politics, is there a way that we can ultimately be more honest in our government? And how can we get there? This week, we saw the Supreme Court throw out any limitations on campaign financing, which basically means the person with the biggest checkbook has the biggest voice in this country. And that leads to even more considerable problems. Both Republicans and Democrats are extremely nervous about this, because you have to be rich in order to really have a voice now, which goes against the very system of democracy that was developed in this country almost 250 years ago. So, we have a quiz Monday, and if you have any questions, please text me or email me. Thank you.